So the IEC has officially launched its National Results Operating Center in Pretoria for Monday's local government elections. In fact, Chief Electoral Officer Sy Mamabolo saying that the record number of candidates makes this election one of the most competitive to date. That's as more than 95,000 candidates will be taking part in the poll. That's a 30,000 increase from the 2016 municipal elections. The IEC is saying that it's ready to hold these free and fair elections with special votes set to begin as soon as this weekend. For more on the planning, everything else to consider, let's bring in Sy Mamabolo, who joins us now via our video link. And Mr. Mamabolo, it's always great speaking to you. Thank you very much for making time. So the ROC, as it's commonly referred to here in the media at least, is officially launched. Does that mean it's fully operational?
Not fully operational because you are not there yet, but I'm sure you'll be joining us in the next few days. Yet the infrastructure is ready. The connections that are needed to be made have been set up, and the facility is functional for practical purposes.
Right. And of course, what really characterizes this election is the time or the lack thereof that the IEC had to put all of this together. And of course, for people who've missed the context, it's because initially there was a hope that we wouldn't have to go to the polls, the Constitutional Court ruling otherwise. How has something like that affected your ability to put together things like the ROC and many other considerations to be made logistically around this election?
Well, having had to get things done in the shortest time possible, 42 days to be precise, has presented a lot of challenges. Our procurement procedures, we still needed to comply with the Treasury prescripts, the PFMA and its regulations and so on. And we had to, for instance, print the ballot paper in 18 days. And what complicated the ballot printing exercise was the record number of political parties. I'll give you an example. In Johannesburg, we have 56 political parties. Now, very few printing presses in the country can print a ballot of that length. So your capacity is therefore constrained because of the limited number of printers that you could use to produce a ballot. So, but we're managing the situation, and we'll be ready come Saturday to start with special votes.
Sure.
I think to run a decent preparatory program for an election from the moment it is proclaimed, you require a minimum of 82 days. In this case, we're working on 42 days. There are colleagues of mine who really have been working 7 days a week since the 3rd of September. They're putting in 12, 15-hour day shifts and so on to meet the preparation deadline for Saturday and ultimately for Monday. But I suppose it's an important constitutional necessity to have a free and fair election by a deadline, and that's why the commission exists in the first place,
right,
to ensure that people can vote for municipal councils.
Sure, but that's quite a difference when you think about how much time is actually needed to get this right. You're saying typically you'd need 82 days. You've only had 42. Are you worried, as confident as you are, that things will go right, that perhaps there may be aspects that fall through the cracks?
Well, I think we've been diligent, even within the constraints of time, to ensure that everything that had to happen has in fact happened. And between today and Saturday morning, we are finalizing the pick and packing of material per voting station, because the bulk of the logistical requirements we require are in fact already at the municipal storage sites. The challenge is now to pack them according to our logistics information system, link it to the number of people registered to ensure that sufficient supplies make their way to voting stations. Will something fall through the cracks? Hopefully not something major, but of course you're dealing with 185,000 officials. You're dealing with over just under 5,000 different permutations of ballot papers that had to be printed in this short time that I'm talking about. But we've been diligent to ensure that we don't have wrong ballots going to wrong places.
Sure. The other interesting element is that this is the first time, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong, it's the first time that we actually have an election being held on a date such that it creates a long weekend. In fact, if memory serves me well, President Cyril Ramaphosa had initially informally announced that the elections would take place on the 27th of October, which is today, but I guess I digress. The point I'm trying to make is that comes with an interesting dynamic, an interesting complexity that you also acknowledged yesterday. How worried are you that this long weekend will essentially have a huge knock-on effect on things like voter turnout come Monday?
Well, quite worried, to be honest, that people may take this to be a long weekend and travel and therefore displace themselves from the voting districts or voting stations in which they're registered, in which eventuality then they will be unable to vote because the electoral prescripts in this case only permit a person to vote at the voting station where they are registered and where they appear on the voter's roll. So should people take advantage of the long weekend and travel and do other things, there'll be a voter displacement phenomenon which may render them incapable of voting. So we are quite worried about that, and we want to partner with yourselves as you talk about these issues to let people aware that unlike in national and provincial where you could vote everywhere, in this election you can only vote at the station you are registered.
Yeah, and I guess just out of interest, I mean, putting this election date on a Monday, was that by circumstance or by choice from the IEC? Again, one has to acknowledge that you're already pressed for time, so I imagine you'd want to push the election date to as late a time as possible, given the Constitutional Court's order.
No, not choice, not choice, by circumstance. Because if you remember, on the 3rd of September, when the court issued its order, it said an election must be held latest by the 1st of November.
Right. So,
given the time available, we had to go at the first date possible, and that gave us the mandate. Historically, and our preference is an election on a Wednesday, because it's midweek. It takes away possibilities of people taking a long weekend, such as is the case this year. But given the circumstances and the realities of the situation, we are left no choice but to accept an election on a Monday.
Right. More complexities in the context that we're living in South Africa. Things like load shedding. How high up a list of concerns is that for you in an environment where we are literally going to be load shed until the brink of the 1st of November? In fact, we might be load shed during the special votes period, which is this weekend.
Indeed, we are on constant. We are in constant communication with Eskom at the highest level, and we've signed a memorandum of understanding really to avoid a situation where there is load shedding on election day and in the days subsequent. In fact, as we understand, the current load shedding, it's about building depleted reserves to ensure that should there be a need later next week for load shedding, then they could use reserve capacity to generate electricity, and therefore, in those circumstances, avoid a load shedding. Those plans have been shared with us. We're working quite closely with colleagues at Eskom, and we hope that those plans will hold on the day.
Sure. What assurance, if any, have you received around what Eskom is committing to, though, come the 1st of November? I mean, are these plans coming with the caveat that they may still fall through if, for argument's sake, there are more unit breakdowns?
Well, I understand the commitment is to avoid load shedding on election day and the subsequent. But of course, they can't give 100% guarantee that there won't be a unit going off, Kubek, Midupi, and so on. But which is why they are building reserves at the moment, so that should that eventuality materialize, then they have sufficient in reserve generation capacity to fall back on, so to speak, and thus avoid a load shedding at the critical phase of the election, in the critical phase of the election.
Sure. So many moving parts creating such a complex situation. You have an unenviable job. Thanks very much for making time to speak to us. Nonetheless, really do appreciate it. Sy Mamabolo is the Chief Electoral Officer for the Independent Electoral Commission.